Welcome to the programme. A day that began with violent protests by security forces in the Palestinian territories is turning into one that threatens new political upheaval. Armed Palestinian police stormed the parliament on Saturday morning to demand payment of overdue wages.
At the same time, 13,000 health workers said that they would end their three-month strike over pay. But in a late development on Saturday, President Mahmoud Abbas says he's planning to call early elections. Qais Abdel Karim, a member of a PLO faction, voted for that decision.
The result that Mr. Abbas has come to after these long dialogues and talks concerning the national unity government is that for the time being, and unless there is a change in the position that's taken by Hamas, this is a dead end, and that the only way to go out of this is through early elections, presidential and legislative elections. And we expect that this call will be included in the speech that he is planning to address to the people maybe by the end of this week.
Well, let's go live now to Gaza and to our correspondent there, Noor O'Day. Noor, the PLO meeting has finished. It seems that early elections could be possible if President Abbas has his way.
Yes, that is true. Early elections for the parliament, for the legislative council, and presidential elections. And that could turn the table around on all parties. Hamas has already rejected this decision, saying that it overturns the democratic choice of the Palestinian people that brought it with a landslide victory earlier this year to the legislative council and secured it a majority that allowed it to form a government without the need for any other political parties. Of course, there's been deadlock and an international siege imposed on the Palestinian Authority since Hamas took office, a siege that resulted in money not being paid to the Palestinian Authority, and in turn in wages not being paid to over 160,000 Palestinian employees, security officers and civil servants alike.
Do you think the Palestinian people are ready for yet more change and a change in the status quo?
Well, the Palestinian people, the Palestinian street, which has been really made very tired and almost bankrupt by these months of sanctions, want to see a light at the end of the tunnel. They want to see some change. They do not want to see bloodshed. They don't want to see Palestinian factions fighting among each other, but they do want to see an end to the sanctions, and they can't see a way out of that. At this point, the international community has been basically uncompromised in its conditions. So has Hamas, and the Palestinian president has engaged Hamas in talks over the past few weeks, and as he put it, the talks reached a dead end. It's unclear whether the Palestinian people will welcome a change one way or the other, but it is ultimately their word that will decide how things will change, if at all, in the coming days.
We saw tensions quite high today over at the Palestinian parliament with that gunfighting there, Noor. How concerned are Hamas and Fatah at how serious this is getting amongst ordinary people that haven't had their wages paid for quite some time?
I think there's concern all around throughout the political spectrum in the occupied Palestinian territory. Leaders from all factions, especially Hamas and Fatah, realize that Palestinian civil servants and security officers who haven't been paid in all these months are a factor of instability rather than stability. However, Hamas has always had a hard line in addressing these kinds of protests. Today, the deputy speaker of the Legislative Council came out, condemned the attack, the demonstration rather, said that it is not representative of the Palestinian civil servants and security officers, and that this is a small group committed to spreading chaos and sabotage in the Palestinian street. So there is an awareness that this kind of crisis will create instability, but there are two very different approaches on how to deal with this crisis.
Well, if there are any developments, we'll be coming back to you. Noor O'Day in Gaza, thank you.
It's been a deadly day in Iraq so far. At least 3 civilians died in an explosion in Mosul, that's in northern Iraq. Another 3 were wounded. And a suicide car bomb killed at least 5 people and wounded 36 in Karbala. The bomb went off near the revered shrine of the Imam Al-Qubbas. Karbala is considered Iraq's second holiest Shiite city after Najaf, where authorities have now tightened security in fear of further attacks on holy Shiite shrines.
Meanwhile, a mortar attack was launched on a Shiite district of Baghdad, killing at least 2 civilians. The mortars landed in a residential alley in the capital's Kadimia neighborhood, causing damage to properties.
And US troops have raided the office of Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr in southern Baghdad. The army hasn't commented on the raid, but shortly afterwards, al-Sadr's followers gathered outside the offices in protest.
The Iraq Study Group's report on what America should do next in Iraq figured prominently in US President George Bush's weekly radio address on Saturday. Bush said he agreed with one conclusion in the report that withdrawing troops too soon could be disastrous.
The Iraq Study Group was clear about the consequences of a precipitous withdrawal from Iraq. The group declared that such a withdrawal would, quote, almost certainly produce greater sectarian violence and lead to a significant power vacuum, greater human suffering, regional destabilization, and a threat to the global economy. The report went on to say if we leave and Iraq descends into chaos, the long-range consequences could eventually require the United States to return.
Bush also said that in charting a new course in Iraq, he would consider all the recommendations made in the Iraq Study Group's report, as well as recommendations from the Pentagon and the US State Department.
Taliban fighters have carried out a death threat made against 2 teachers in eastern Afghanistan. The teachers, who were sisters, and 3 other members of their family were shot dead at their home. The attack took place in the district of Narang in the Kunar province in the east of the country. The provincial education director said the sisters had been warned in a letter from the Taliban to quit teaching. In the last year, 20 educators have been killed and nearly 200 schools have been burned down.
45 women who were trying to kick their drink and drugs addiction have been killed in a fire at their Moscow hospital. Rescue workers say many had tried to flee, but the building's windows were blocked by metal grills.
As our Moscow correspondent Jonah Hull reports, firefighters already suspect the blaze was started deliberately.
The call to Moscow's fire department was late in coming. Far too late, said firefighters at the scene, to save those trapped in a corridor between the fire and a locked gate. The victims, all women, died fighting for their lives as smoke and flames filled the airless space. Windows were shut with locks hospital staff couldn't open. It happened, said the fire chief, because one of the emergency staircases was locked. In that corridor on the 2nd floor, he says, all those people died. Firefighters say the hospital was slow to organize an evacuation. It's believed staff and patients leapt from 2nd floor windows in other parts of the building to save themselves. In daylight, there's little sign that a deadly fire swept through this place overnight. It looks like a normally functioning hospital, except that security is tight. It's thought the fire was deliberate. Arson, of course, must yet be proved. The fire is thought to have started in a wooden kitchen cabinet. As relatives absorb the extent of this tragedy, questions are being asked that go beyond the cause. Why were hospital staff apparently unable to help those trapped inside? An investigation may conclude that fire safety violations meant the deaths that occurred here could have been prevented. Jonah Hull, Al Jazeera, Moscow.
German police say they found traces of radiation in a Hamburg apartment linked to a contact of the murdered former Russian spy. But so far, tests on the apartment of Dmitry Kovtun haven't uncovered any hint of plutonium-210, the rare radioactive substance that killed Alexander Litvinenko last month. Kovtun met Litvinenko in London on the day the former spy fell ill. Kovtun is reportedly being treated for radiation poisoning. Meanwhile, a business associate of Kovtun also met Litvinenko has postponed a meeting with investigators.
In Somalia, government forces, reportedly backed by Ethiopian troops, have clashed with fighters from the Union of the Islamic Courts for a second day running. A UIC official says the fighting took place in the southern village of Rama Adi. That's about 80 kilometers from the interim government stronghold of Badoa. The village lies at a front line between the two sides.